Donc, Conceptual Engineering, a roadmap to practice. So that's me, Manuel Gustavo, Senior Program Manager at Jester, as I've said just before. And as Clement just noticed, the purpose of that kind of talk and the paper itself that you can download with the QR code that's displayed on the slide is to provide some sort of entry point into the very kind of lively topic of conceptual engineering, which is kind of hotly debated in the field of analytic philosophy. So, it's been published in 2022, so it's a bit kind of, while slightly outdated. It was a co-authored project with my friends and colleague Ryan Neff from the University of Cape Town, South Africa, and Stefan Koch from Bielefeld University in Germany. Stefan is really kind of working still a lot into the nitty-gritty of these kind of issues. So if you want to know also a bit more about her, about the topic, you're most welcome to reach out to them, well, on my behalf, if you please. So I don't know if you just kind of just to frame the general kind of background of this project. So it was a commission project. That's how it works for Philosophy Compass. I guess you know the journal, which is meant to provide you, as I've just said, entry point in the best current research for both specialists and non-specialists alike. So it comes with a few constraints, which are, sorry, listed there. So in terms of content, it has to be easily kind of accessible. The readership, as I've just mentioned, are both the expert and the non-expert of the field of the topic. And it's a pretty short article in the sense that it comes with a 5K word limit. So turning to, as I've said just before, you can download, and I'll kind of share the QR code at the end of the talk again. You can download the paper on the journal's webpage. It's an open access one. So what I'll do here, that's a general outline of what we cover during this talk. It's first providing you with a kind of general kind of introductory information about what it is all about. Then we'll focus on the engineering process itself, which is kind of critical part of the very notion of conceptual engineering. Then we'll come with distinguishing between goals and targets, namely what is conceptual engineering about, what is it meant to do. We'll eventually next address the methods that you can kind of draw from and combine in a conceptual engineering project. And eventually we'll wrap everything up dealing with a few critical, but yeah, still a bit overlooked ethical issues that kind of pop in with the very idea of running a conceptual engineering project, sorry. So let's start with the first step, introduction. So as you might know, but maybe it's not the case, conceptual engineering since 2017, 2018 has been that kind of new buzzword in the metaphilosophical world of analytic philosophy. So that's the 2020, well, it's kind of outdated, but that's the 2020 field paper survey. And even though it was just coined a few years ago, like 2017, 2018, as I said, it was kind of, it drew already quite a lot of attention, of traction in the field of analytic philosophy. And you can also kind of refer to the field paper, repository. I've just checked it this morning. I think there are more than 325 papers that have been published so far since 2017. So that's kind of pretty huge. I'm not sure that it has already existed, a similar kind of explosion in another subfield of philosophy. Anyway, we can kind of draw the methodology kind of very roughly for conceptual engineering by distinguishing two kind of different strands. On the one hand, you have the metaphilosophical tradition that has involved people such as Simon Blackburn, Brandon, Sharp, Kaplan, these kind of people, all kind of referring to each other's. And on the other hand, a kind of scholarship, because the term of engineering in that kind of methodological context has been kind of coined by Carnap himself in his correspondence to Quine, Dear Fun, Dear, I do not remember the title, that's been edited by Richard Creeth. And in that book, you can find the phrase linguistic engineering and so on. And the connection between both traditions, namely the metaphilosophical one and the Carnap scholarship, has been somehow kind of put up front by the experimental philosophy field in the same kind of years, like 2019, something like that. And the field has then expanded as well and connected to what was done in social philosophy and the phrase of ameliorative analysis proposed by Sally Haslinger. So, in a very kind of nutshell, the kind of typical characterization of conceptual engineering is to define it as a method for assessing and improving our representational devices, aka concepts, or such representational devices. And it comes with two somewhat competing rationals. Namely, on the one hand, there are these people that say basically that our representational devices, including concepts, are basically kind of deficient, defective, and we need to fix them. Or other people are just kind of advocating for the position that, however these concepts are or these representational devices are, we always need to strive for the better, and therefore to improve what we have in terms of the concept we use. So, and lastly, in terms of general information, I think that's the last point. Current research in conceptual engineering can be kind of distinguished into two components. On the one hand, that's a bit less the case nowadays. It was, as I said, it's a bit outdated. It's 2022, the paper. There's the theory of conceptual engineering that reflects on questions such as how does conceptual engineering fit in with the general kind of theory of mind or theory of language and so on? What is a conceptual engineering operating on? Are these concepts? Are these speaker meanings? Are these other such devices? And how should we construct concepts for the very purposes of conceptual engineering? And on the other hand, there's the practice of conceptual engineering that basically applies the method of conceptual engineering to specific case studies, such as truth. That's the very kind of most famous case that's been kind of put forward by Kevin Sharp in 2013, or women and race and gender concept by Sally Haslinger. You can think in the kind of non-philosophical realm of the concept of planet that's been revised in 2006 by the AIU and other such concepts, basically. So two different kind of aspects of the field. And lastly, well, the goal, well, the aim of this presentation, the aim of the article, a roadmap to practice, is to kind of, well, provide us with the tools to kind of conduct this project by building on these two strands, practice and theory, and distinguishing the process of conceptual engineering, the goal and targets of such project, and the method we can draw from to run these projects. So I think that's fine so far, and we can turn to the second stage, the engineering process. So a bit of background here. So conceptual engineering, as I've just alluded to, has been some sort of success story in the philosophical world. And while there are many reasons for why it was the case, some are really kind of contingent and due to kind of historical facts, such as the obtaining of large grants that kind of fostered collaborative endeavors, such as the founding of the Concept Lab by Kaplan at the University of Oslo, now relocated in Hong Kong, or the running of webinar that were or that have been kind of really popular in the English-speaking world of analytic philosophy, the launching of a YouTube channel and so on. And another aspect that may be more kind of core to the very idea of conceptual engineering, namely its branding, the phrase we have devised to catch what we are kind of aiming to do in this with this philosophical method. As Kaplan says in his book, that's the only monograph so far existing on conceptual engineering. So he goes the explanation for the smart branding hypothesis. It might turn out that even for us, namely professional philosophers, A significant amount of our work consists in trying to trigger the right kind of lexical effect. I won't delve into lexical effects. I can tell you more about that in the Q&A if you're interested in that. Basically, connotations, if you wish. Most likely, a name can also make you more disposed to accept, say, a philosophical theory, such as conceptual engineering. It is, after all, cheaper to accept a philosophical theory than to buy a bottle of Coke, so we should expect the barriers to be lower. So, and what is good about this brand of conceptual engineering is that, well, it commutes, as the linguists say, with a very well-established method of conceptual analysis. So, thereby it draws somehow with the associated connotation, namely the kind of prestigious lineage, if you wish. And on the other hand, it comes with some sort of slight difference, hence the idea of a commutation here in that case. And the difference consists in that dominant narrative, that conceptual analysis, the traditional kind of method of analytic philosopher, is about describing the concept we have in use, whereas conceptual engineering is about prescribing these very same concepts, those that we use and have. So it comes with a very kind of explicit normative bent. So this very dominant narrative has yet some sort of shortcoming, which is basically kind of flagged by Mashri in his latest book, well, that's a bit old, 2017, saying that actually in practice, conceptual analysis is not only descriptive, it is also prescriptive, it is also normative. And we can say the other way around, that conceptual engineering itself is not only prescriptive, it's not only normative, it is also descriptive, as we will see in a minute. What the next question is basically what is good about that very notion of engineering in the context of a philosophical method and in its contrast with the very notion established phrase of conceptual analysis. What are the lexical effects, as I've just kind of been using the phrase quoting Herman, what are the lexical effects that are associated with that phrase of conceptual engineering? And basic observation we can make is that conceptual engineering, the phrase, contributes to framing philosophy as a problem solving method that intends to kind of introduce artifacts that are purpose-driven to solve some very human-like issues in the concrete world. And that comes thereby with kind of adding a very use or giving philosophy a very use or translational, as they call it in the kind of more medical field, orientation, namely philosophy becoming being about delivering workable solution to tangible problems. So a bit of away from the more armchair reflective construal of philosophy itself as a practice and a method. So, and that's exactly actually the way the word was coined by Simon Blackburn in his introduction to philosophy titled Thought, dated 99. He says, the word philosophy carries unfortunate connotations. It is impractical, unworldly, weird. I suspect that all philosophers and philosophy students share that moment of silent embarrassment when someone innocently asks us what we do. I would prefer to introduce myself as doing conceptual engineering. So the very phrase was used in the spirit of making philosophy something that's actually meaningful for a real world problem. So now you have two main options to make sense of that very basic phrase of engineering in the context of conceptual engineering as a philosophical method. There's first a very kind of figurative or metaphorical understanding of the engineering label, and that's by far the most kind of popular option in the field. Well, basically people conceiving of conceptual engineering as any change that constitute any sort of improvement in the previous state of our representational or conceptual devices. And the virtue of that very kind of loose understanding of engineering, the engineering label in the phrase conceptual engineering, is that it helps connecting quite a wide array, a wide bunch of somewhat similar practices, including reflective equilibrium, some version of conceptual analysis. For instance, Frank Jackson was really keen to say, well, I'm a big fan of conceptual engineering. Actually, the way I construe conceptual analysis is a form of conceptual engineering, and so on. So that very loose understanding helps you to kind of connect very different kind of existing practices among philosophy as a method, and thereby it fills some sort of hermeneutical gap by giving them some sort of categorical unity. And it also helps reframing existing project or previous project and shedding a new light on these. And that was the case, for instance, when Kwame Anthony Appiah, the famous critical race thinker and philosopher, gave the presentation in the seminar we were running, and he was just kind of saying all the time, well, if by then, saying like in 92, I've had the phrase of conceptual engineering, I would have conceived of what I was kind of aiming for and what I was doing as a philosopher in such and such way. So that's a way of reframing past or existing practices, and that's some sort of virtue of that kind of very loose understanding of the phrase conceptual of the phrase engineering in the conceptual engineering uh, label. The problems, on the other hand, are what I've called the Jourdain syndrome, that kind of tend to reduce the very kind of idea of conceptual engineering to some sort of just kind of rebranding, some sort of what we've been doing all along. And Jourdain syndrome goes as follows. Maybe you know the very famous Pierre by play by Molière, sorry. By my face, for more than 40 years, I've been doing conceptual engineering without knowing anything about it. And I am much obliged to you for having taught me that. So that's kind of the situation we would end up in if we were to abide by that very loose construal of conceptual engineering. The other problem that's connected to that very loose understanding of of engineering and the phrase conceptual engineering is that it might provoke some sort of false positive, in the sense that basically you'd be obsessed by trying to find instances of conceptual engineering which would be in actual case only some sort of side effect of more general kind of theory change, such as in the context of the history of science. And that has been kind of critically the case, people trying to find instances in past conceptual change in science, whereas there was just kind of a secondary side effect of more general kind of paradigmatic change. Anyway, the alternative to that figurative understanding is a more literal one, is the more kind of strong understanding of the label engineering. And it comes with a very view of conceptual engineering as consisting of a staged process with measurement criteria for ameliorative, a given representational or conceptual, if you wish, status quo. So the virtue of such a understanding of the phrase engineering is that it kind of really put forward the very strong functionalism that is always implicitly adopted when you kind of build on a conceptual engineering framework, namely taking concepts as devices that is as tools that serve certain purposes, and on the other hand, it has that very kind of programmatic um, future-oriented, if you wish, band, which is basically that conceptual engineering might be something that has not yet existed in the history of philosophy, and that we are really striving for something new and not just rebranding something we've been doing all the time without being kind of really aware of it. The problem is that maybe it's not kind of the best method, or it's not kind of straightforwardly applicable or suited to philosophers' ivory tower issues, like the pseudo kind of philosophy, but it's kind of really world oriented, if you wish. Anyway, what I'll do for the remainder of this section only is to kind of present you the three kind of dominant construal of this more kind of literal understanding that leads to the more, I would call it, sophisticated notion of the engineering process in that context. So basically, the first basic stage is to kind of distinguish the different components of the engineering process itself. So first is the assessment aspect, the assessment stage, which is about kind of assessing the functionality of a concept in terms of fitness for purpose. Then comes the improvement phase, which is about improving that very functionality, again, for instance, by fixing the deficiency you've been able to identify in the previous stage, namely the assessment stage. These are the two kind of most widely acknowledged component of conceptual engineering. That's due to the fact that Kaplan kind of characterized the method as assessing and improving, as I've said in the opening slides of the presentation, assessing and improving our representational devices. So these are the two main kind of building blocks of conceptual engineering. Then one that is kind of typically dismissed as typically pertaining to conceptual analysis and therefore not conceptual engineering, but I told you that it's a somewhat misguided contrast, is the description stage, where you basically kind of delineate and regiment the target object of an engineering project, say, concept, as a representational device. And with the notion of regimentation comes, as with Maastricht quotation that I gave you before, this idea of a normative input that is already there when you kind of describe something. And lastly, comes the implementation component of conceptual engineering project, which is about disseminating and securing outreach and uptake for the target representational devices, such as the concepts that you've been able to re-engineer and improve thereby. So these are the four components. The first two are the most kind of widely acknowledged, represented, and so on. The description was a slightly kind of sidestep, and the implementation is highly problematic. The next aspect is to kind of focus on the relationship of these kind of different components. So there have been kind of different views on how these four different components as the building blocks of the engineering process are actually interacting and integrated within an engineering process. So those that are kind of developed that view are Burgess and Plunkett in a 2020 paper in I do not remember the journal, but I can give you the reference later. It's in the paper we've published in the Field Compass paper, sorry. So they said, well, first, if we were consider, sorry, it's what I've tried to kind of express with this color coding. If you were to consider the union of all these components, that would obviously be way too over-inclusive. Basically, any kind of philosophy you would be doing would count as an engineering project. On the other hand, if you were to aim for the intersection of these components, well, basically, very little of philosophy would be kind of deemed deserving the label of conceptual engineering. That wouldn't be a problem for me, because I think it's a more forward-looking approach, and we shouldn't kind of look at the past to find past instances of such a project. Anyway, they say we shouldn't go for that way, and they kind of end up resting on the union of intersections, namely that each pair of these four components would amount to an instance of conceptual engineering. And their claim culminates somewhat in that kind of phrase, in that kind of saying, prototypical paradigmatic projects in conceptual engineering are exercises in conceptual improvement guided by conceptual assessment. We should add here analysis here, description here, in the service of conceptual implementation. So, and that leads you to the possibility to reconstruct these four phases as a staged process built on these the respective components, so description, assessment, improvement, and implementation. What we need to kind of observe when we have this kind of a full process in mind is that it can include, it's non-linear in the sense it can include back and forth between the different stages, and it is meant to be iterative in the sense that it's an open-ended process, namely meaning that when you reach the final stage of the process, it might be that you still need to go for another round because you're not kind of reaching the goal you set forth when engaging in that project. And lastly, our take in the paper is to add these two critical stages, namely the focus stage, where basically you specify explicitly what the purpose of your project is, and you operationalize that purpose into objective goals and target objects for your project. And you have also interpoled here a test phase that consists in validating and verifying the re-engineered target representational device to avoid any detrimental, harmful side effect and other such consideration. And one thing you can observe when you have this kind of full picture of an engineering dynamic is that it kind of resonates well with what they do in the ethics of technology, such as with frameworks, such as the design for values methodologies that have been kind of promoted by people such as Philip Bray, Ivo van der Poel, and all the Dutch people affiliated to the SDIT program about the socially disruptive emerging technologies. So, turning now to goals and target. I hope it's not too rambling for you because I cannot see your face, but we can clarify this during the Q&A. So now turning to the goals and target. So that's a distinction we introduce in the third section of the paper about adopting a pluralist approach. So the question of which target is object are the best suited for conceptual engineering has been a very vexed issue and an overly discussed topic. I just listed a few proponent or kind of people that participate in that debate, but there are so many more like that. So many papers on that issues that kind of turn to be a bit kind of a bit boring in the end, I must say. But anyway, people are saying, well, conceptual engineering should be about concepts. No, conceptual engineering should be about concepts in a very kind of a philosophical construal of concepts or psychological construal of concepts. Or no, they shouldn't be about concept. They should be about speaker meanings or about many different things, social norms or what have you. Anyway, that was the notion of a target object for engineering project. And here we introduce typically kind of overlooked distinction before our paper between purpose, goals, and target. Building on insights from the literature in the engineering design process, and more importantly, maybe the very underrepresented philosophy of design. So philosophers drawing insights from design as a discipline, such as Kwame Antonio Appiah, that I've just kind of alluded to quite a few slides ago, and Luciano Floridi, the digital ethicist, previously from Oxford, now in Yale at the Digital Ethics Center. They've been kind of really innovative in that regard, drawing from design and the insight they could build to transfer them to philosophy as a method. Basically, the idea of the distinction between purpose, goals, and targets is that conceptual engineering, as Riggs said in 2019, usually motivate the project by claiming that changing concepts can change other things than we care about, not by claiming that changing concept is valuable for its own sake. So the idea is that conceptual engineering do not want to change concepts or whatever representational devices they might be targeting as an end in itself. They just do that as a means to achieve some further goal. And that's basically what Jenny Nadeau also says, when we engage in conceptual engineering, we do so because we care about certain consequences that we all to resolve from the said engineering of whatever target representational device we are aiming at. And something that's also critical to consider, I've just kind of alluded to him in the previous slide, is that we should here be very careful by having in mind what designers and engineers call design specification. That's what Kwame Antonio Appiah says in his forthcoming book chapter, when people say that philosophers have been doing conceptual engineering all along, such as the Jourdain conundrum that I've kind of confronted you with. I think that this misunderstands the importance of the role of design specification. And we go back to it in a minute because it's really critical in the whole process of engineering concepts or other such representational devices, that aspect of design specifying the whole project. So, and that's it actually. So you might have engage in a conceptual engineering with some sort of general purpose in mind, such as fighting for social justice, you might be a bit kind of more specific about that in terms of the rights of the racialized people or of gendered people that are discriminated on the basis of their gender appearances and so on. And then you specify that general purpose into some functional requirements that tell you what you want your target representational device to achieve. And eventually, that helps you identify the appropriate target that you might wish to focus your project on in terms of describing its basic structure, if you wish, and identifying as consisting of a concept or a lexical item such as a word, or maybe, I don't know, you might be targeting some specific social norms and so on. So we can go back to that in the Q&A if that's not clear, but I hope it already is. And what we say in the paper is that we are very kind of welcoming a pluralism with regard to the different kind of taxonomies, both in terms of goals and targets that are presented you with. So you have the purposes that are just promote social justice, foster scientific inquiry, protect the environment, what have you. You can be a bit more specific about that, or you ought to be a bit more specific about that if you want your project to get off the grounds. And you then turn that kind of general purpose into some specific functional requirements that are about maybe changing the way people kind of mentally classify objects of the world, such as in terms of mental classification, that give you some hint about the proper target object you might wish to focus on for your project, such as concepts in a very kind of semantic understanding of concepts or philosophical understanding of what concepts are in terms of intentions and so on. Otherwise, you might, for instance, taking another example, decide to focus your project or to operationalize and specify its function in terms of modifying people's default inferential patterns, the way in which kind of things triggers associations in their mind when they are typically kind of stereotyping and the kind of essentialist inferences that they might draw from using a certain phrase. And accordingly, you might wish your conceptual engineering project to focus on a very kind of cognitive construal of concepts, like the way psychologists conceive of concepts in terms of prototypes or in terms of exemplars, and what sometimes philosophers call conceptions and so on. And you can go down the columns and across the lines along the way kind of same idea. So you might wish to focus on communication, and if you do so, while you'd be kind of well advised to focus your project on what philosopher of language called speaker meanings and so on, linguistic norm, linguistic practices. I guess you get the point. So, and we say that, yeah, indeed, we're not kind of advocating, well, I've been advocating, and Stefan as well, a lot for saying that actually conceptual engineering should be about one of these specific goals. But in the paper, which is meant to be way more ecumenical and way more kind of consensual than our kind of own papers, we strive for being kind of pluralistic and say, well, actually, conceptual engineering project should be kind of really pluralist and kind of willing to adopt or to focus on these various targets depending on how they basically operationalize their general purpose into a set of functional requirement. And lastly, maybe an additional remark is that conceptual engineering projects can come with various scopes. So that can kind of really target a specific concept within a very specific subfield of a scientific discipline, for example, or, well, if you think of the way kind of the concept of planet has been kind of re-engineered in 2006, that was at first targeting kind of the astronomers communities, and then it spread out, obviously. Or you can be kind of very broad from the onset and say, well, basically, I want to kind of fight for a new way of construing of women across the whole society, and I'm aiming for really kind of a wide scope project, and I would need to, well, obviously built on a dissemination strategy, what we call implementation, that is kind of suited for achieving such a purpose, obviously. So goal target complementarity, meaning that we should kind of being able to combine with these different goals and targets, and that even when you kind of decide to engage or to focus on one such specific target, you might wish to also have in mind the way you can also kind of complement your project and enhance its success prospects by building on a complementary target that's also at stake. For instance, if you are targeting people's mental classification, you might well address at the same time the way in which our kind of pattern for inferences are kind of built in our cognitive competencies and so on. And so in that regard, we are not defending in the paper any form of monism. We say we are pluralist, contrary to what we're saying in our own contributions. So I think I'm still good time-wise. So returning to the first part of the talk, for section of the paper that's titled Methods. And here, basically what I'll do is to build on this distinction. Well, I've kind of I have another version where it's kind of more over encompassing, but I kind of sidestep the purpose stage here, focusing on goals and targets that we've just kind of seen a minute ago, and kind of complementing them by the engineering process and how their determination would or will or should maybe affect the way in which you might draw from different kind of methods. And that's what we do in that corresponding section of the paper. So in the paper, we only focus on these three stages. Well, as I've said, it's a very short paper, like 5K long, word long paper, sorry. And we focus, because we sidestep description as not being that characteristic of the engineering process itself, as I've already said a few times. And we take three different kind of use cases that we cover to explain how the conceptual engineers can draw from various existing methods to run their own engineering project. So starting at the assessment phase, we build on a control of concepts as in a very kind of psychological sense, and using the methods of experimental philosophy. For the case that kind of concerns the improvement stage, we deal with a very kind of semantic control of concepts in the context of a somewhat logical analysis. And lastly, in the context of implementation, for the stage of implementation, we deal with target objects that consist of linguistic practices, and we draw from the methods or the techniques of so-called social norm nudging à la Bicchieri, building on the literatural norms from Thaler and Sustain and so on. I hope it's clear. So the first case study draws from Mashri, Edouard Mashri's book, Philosophy Within Its Proper Bound. That's a metaphilosophical book criticizing the method of cases, aka thought experiment. It's located at the assessment stage, construes of concepts, as I've just said, as psychological entities. It targets the concept of innateness, and that is spelled out in three features, namely fixity, typicality, teleology. And what they do, Mashri and colleagues, and Griffiths, Mashri and Griffiths actually, they ran a survey methodology to test the weight of each features, and what they discover is that lay people when presented with fictitious cases of birdsong and asked whether it is innate, they actually have a deficient concept of innateness, in the sense that they draw false inferences. They draw from the instance of one of these three features, the inference that the birdsong is actually also possesses the other two features, whereas the bundle of these three features are largely to be conceived as independent from each other. So the idea is that here we can use XFI methods to help us flag deficiencies in the way in which we use a concept. So that's basically the case study about the assessment stage, taking concepts in a very kind of psychological construal. The case study 2 about the improvement stage takes concepts as semantic entities. It targets the concept of truth, and a very kind of logical understanding of the notion that is deemed to be inconsistent in terms of the constitutive principles it is built on, giving rise to paradoxes such as the liar. And Kevin Sharp proposes using the method of logical analysis to introduce two replacement or surrogate concept that he terms ascending truths and descending truths. So he splits the concept of truth into two different concepts, truth one, truth two, each obeying one constitutive principle of the former concept of truth, and thereby we get an improved logical concept of truth that gives rise to no liar-like paradoxes. The whole book is about that, replacing truth. It's pretty obvious it's written on the till, if I may say. And the only kind of caveat we should have in mind here is that it's restricted to the logical use of the notion of truth and not meant to kind of cover its more lay understanding, right? And the last case study is about the implementation stage of the engineering process, and it takes as target object linguistic meanings, where linguistic meanings are taken to supervene on linguistic practices and behavior. And the idea is that we can induce changes in linguistic practices by provoking changes in linguistic norms, and thereby we would then achieve changes in linguistic meaning. So the upshot is that behavioral research on social norm nudging, such as Alabicchieri, shows or provide conceptual engineers with an effective, feasible, and specific means that are the requirements that Christian set for himself, Christian Nims, to implement changes in linguistic meanings. So here we have the three case studies we've covered in the paper, and that's just kind of to give you a very rough idea of how it could work. We should complement these with any other such methods that conceptual engineering would be kind of competent or amenable to kind of draw from. So if you were to have a conception of concepts in terms of intentions or the kind of philosophical construal thereof, well, you might also kind of combine at the description phase embedding some sort of very kind of classical way of doing conceptual analysis. That's what Frank Jackson was kind of advocating for instance, and so on. And you have all these different kind of options. This is just kind of for you to get an idea of how broad the picture can be and how the determination works from specifying a general purpose into some functional requirement that helps you identify some descriptive or non-functional requirements in terms of what the target object should look like, be it concepts in terms of extension, concepts in terms of conception, semantic values, and so on, and eventually guiding you in terms of choosing which is the method or the kind of technique that you might wish to draw from, and that's the most amenable to your own project. So there we go, last section of the paper. So here we turn to different kind of criticism in conclusion of the paper that have been kind of put against conceptual engineering. So the first thing to observe is that, well, the reason conceptual engineering has witnessed such an explosion since 2017, like I've alluded to, the more than 325 paper published since then, which is just kind of amazing, is also due to the fact that most people have been kind of really enthusiastic about it. They have not been kind of really but some criticism have come from within the conceptual engineers themselves. And the most kind of mainstream criticisms have been questioning the very feasibility of conceptual engineering, or whether it is just some sort of wishful thinking of philosophers kind of isolated in their very tower. So these criticisms have questioned its feasibility in terms of either at a very kind of abstract level, in terms of metaphysical or metasemantic factors that have been kind of given rise to different challenges that go under the name of the implementation challenge, the externalist challenge, the discontinuity challenge, which is some sort of the discontinuity challenge is some sort of revamped version of Strawson's objection to Carnap's method of explication. And all of these are already kind of foreseen in the 2018 book by Kaplan. And on the other hand, there are also kind of more like concrete based criticism that comes from empirical philosophy, such as experimental philosophy or diachronic linguistic philosophy. And that kind of builds on psychological semantic factor, but empirically informed factor, and that goes under the name of the attractor challenge by Mashri 21, the control problem in terms of psycholinguistics by Fisher 2020, and another one that comes from diachronic linguistic by Koslow 2022. But the one I will kind of wrap my talk up with are those that are kind of emerging, but well, it was 2 years ago, and actually I've not seen them much more emerging in the meantime. So they basically kind of assume the feasibility of conceptual engineering to reflect on its potential misuses as a philosophical method. So there are four of these potential misuses. The first is could be kind of termed the bad ends problem. And it consists basically on the idea that, well, actually, conceptual engineering as a philosophical method can well be used with ill-intended or malevolent purposes, right? Enforcing some form of, as Matthew Shield coined it, a conceptual domination. That's perfectly the case, and that's just kind of, as I said, somewhere, I'm not sure it's here, some sort of result of outcome of the, yeah, it's just an outcome of the metanormative neutrality of conceptual engineering as a philosophical method, as Katarina coins it, Dutil-Novage coins it. So she says metanormatively neutral in the sense that it's as a tool, it's just a tool. It can be, normativity kicks in once you plug it in some specific purposes, but before, as a kind of just a framework, a methodological framework, it is neutral. So it can be used for bad ends, of course. But as Roger Crisp argue, well, it would go against the very kind of basic, well-intended, wishful thinking, welfarist rationale of conceptual engineering as a philosophical project. Well, I'm not convinced by that point, but still, I'm happy to say that conceptual engineering can be used with ill-intended purposes. The solution to that would be to explicitly state the ends of an engineering project and to disclose any conflict of interest or, well, mitigation possibilities to that kind of problem. Another problem is in terms of bad consequences, namely maybe engineers are not always kind of responsible in their use of their own method, leading to what Teresa Marquez called conceptual perversions. And so the worries are that on the one hand, conceptual engineering may well deteriorate something that was maybe not optimal as a concept or as a representational device, but still quite functional. And in German, they call that the Verschlimmbesserung issue. You try to improve, but actually you kind of disimprove what you were trying to fix. Or else you can have an expected harmful side effect. And to mitigate these worries, maybe you can kind of introduce a very carefully conducted description stage in the process, where if you identify that the project you are embarking on is targeting a concept that it's actually kind of working quite well, even if not optimally, well, you should just kind of stop it here and not take the risk of disimproving it. And also with regard to the unexpected harmful side effect, you might wish to add a very kind of critical stage, which consists of the testing, verifying and validating your prototype product before launching it in the wild, if you wish. Last slide, two last types of misuses. So one in terms of kind of more political bent, is that conceptual engineering as a method could be co-opted by those who are in power to abuse those that are less powerful in the form of mass persuasion. That's a worry that's been risen by Mathieu Kellot and Friedman Bieber in 2021, Pacific Quarterly, whatever the title is of the journal. And so to mitigate these worries, you might wish to limit the power to control collective representational repertoires to some specific items. Maybe, for instance, you do not want certain people that are in power to re-engineer the very notion of a free vote or what democracy is, or this kind of notions. Maybe they should be kind of protected. And well, there's an allusion to Hugo Mercier's recent book about the miserable failure of all attempt at mass persuasion that is meant to say that anyway, if it happened, that's very unlikely to succeed. This kind of co-optation by those in power. And lastly, the one that I've been the most kind of fascinating about is the possible use of conceptual engineering to manipulate people via the undermining of their condition for cognitive autonomy. That's a worry that's been risen by Carsten Steen in the talk he gave in our seminar, in our webinar a couple of years ago, and by F. Kitzig in a 2022 paper. And so to mitigate these worries, you might wish a conceptual engineer to engage with people's cognitive capacities, so shifting away from the nudge paradigm that comes from Steen and Thaler to what other contenders, Ralf Erdwig and Till Grüne-Janov, have called boost in terms of enhancing and building new cognitive hermeneutics into people's mind instead of manipulating them. And you might wish also to become very inclusive and participatory in the way in which you negotiate the concept you intend to re-engineer to avoid any sort of paternalistic fallibility, as they call it in the literature. So that would lead us to eventually make of conceptual engineering not only a method that is empirically based, interdisciplinary, but also, as its name suggests, that will serve as a program for philosophy's engagement with the real world. And on that note, I'm happy to conclude my talk, just listing these few references. If you are interested in conceptual engineering, we have this website, the Conceptual Engineering XYZ website, which is the network of conceptual engineering you're most welcome to engage with. You can kind of sign in for a mailing list. There's the field papers repository that's also kind of visible on the website with that phrase conceptual engineering. There's the YouTube channel with about 100 video and recording with the most kind of famous philosophers you can find dealing with conceptual engineering. And lastly, there's a not that lively group, but still interesting Facebook group titled Conceptual Engineering. And again, you're most welcome to join any of these. And finally, we have upcoming publication in the Synthèse library book series, so not the journal, the book series by Springer as well. That's building on the 6 years of not 6 years, 6 seasons of the webinar we've run. So there are 3 books that are coming out of this webinar, and I've just signed a new contract for a book with Routledge that will be bringing the method of conceptual engineering and applying it to emerging technologies such as obviously AI, but not only climate engineering technologies, newer technologies, and so on, in the context of broadly speaking ethical issues. So stay tuned in that regard. Thank you for your attention.